Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering woke media desperate to stop collapse of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Woke media outlets, which are most mass media outlets, have caught on to diversity, equity, and inclusion starting to collapse throughout the country. They say that DEI is under attack, and they're trying to figure out a way to call everyone racist, which used to work, but now it's not working. People just aren't having it. The gentleman on my thumbnail used to be a DEI proponent and now is a DEI critic. People are turning on DEI left and right. Coming from CNN, DEI supporters see echoes of America's fraught racial history in attacks on diversity efforts. That's their way of saying you're a racist when they know if they just said you were a racist, it would not work. They're trying their best, but as you can see, it doesn't even resonate. From the New York Times, America is under attack inside the anti-DEI crusade. From the Harvard Business Review, DEI is under attack. Here's how companies can mitigate the legal risks. So they know there's legal liability for companies. They can all be sued, and eventually they all will be sued. And here's the Harvard Business Review telling you, look, here's how we can help you try to break the law, but ultimately that's not going to work. And from The Guardian, diversity policies face full-out attack in 2024, leading HR boss warns. President of the largest human resources organization in the United States says national shift following George Floyd's death is fading. From CNN, DEI supporters see echoes of America's fraught racial history in attacks on diversity efforts. What a headline! How about just come out and say it? If you don't do what we say, you're a racist. Dr. Franklin Tuitt, that's this guy, has 25 years of experience as an academic and an administrator in higher education, with many of those years spent fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion, commonly known as DEI. Tuitt, now the University of Connecticut's Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, told CNN he sees historic parallels between the growing outrage over DEI and the backlash to previous efforts to integrate education and expand civil rights. Quote, some of the tactics that are being used, whether it's through legislation or through intimidation, are tactics that have been used previously, Tuitt said. But he argues this wave of attacks is more targeted than anything he's ever seen before. Quote, I think it's fair to say that we're seeing a much more focused and intentional and strategic effort to limit the effects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's a very multi-layered approach, he said. I do think that is new. He goes on to say, quote, it's taken on a greater level of focus than I've seen in my career in higher education. As efforts to promote DEI in academia increasingly come under fire, defenders like Tuitt tell CNN they're trying to uphold American ideals while critics accuse them of advantaging some groups, like racial minorities, over others. Critics are linking DEI to critical race theory. Paulette Granberry Russell, president of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, said she feels the criticisms of DEI have negatively impacted public opinion about what the work can accomplish in the classroom and beyond. Quote, I think the strategy has been somewhat successful in terms of reinforcing fears and using inflammatory language that misrepresents what this work is all about. Tuitt said, the goal of DEI programming is to create institutional environments that allow all students to access resources and achieve at the highest level, regardless of their background. Quote, our students need to graduate from our institutions being set up to succeed in an increasingly diverse and global society, he said, adding that it's important for students to learn about America's history of discrimination and structural inequities so they can shape a better world. Quote, we need leaders and change agents capable of creating systems that don't exploit others. Of course, these statements are delusional. There is criticism of this and some good writing and good commentary as we go on in the article. But some of the most outspoken critics of DEI initiatives and policies have argued they are unnecessary, divisive, harmful, and even, in the words of billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman, racist. Yes, of course they're racist. What the woke have done is given themselves permission, because of their agenda, to redefine what the word racist means. They will accept that you can be prejudiced no matter what race you are, but you can't be racist if you're supposedly part of an oppressed group. They do accept prejudice, they don't accept racist. That's why you don't hear prejudice as a criticism of DEI or any discussion of that word prejudiced anymore, because that's their safety valve and it's where they admit, yeah, this is wrong because it's prejudiced, but we'll just call you racist and say that we can't be racist and go on being racist. Christopher Rufo, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a conservative think tank who opposes DEI and was responsible in a big way for getting rid of Claudine Gay from the presidency of Harvard, has led a year-long crusade against critical race theory, or CRT, which recognizes racism in American society as systemic and institutional. He suggested in a December essay for the City Journal that institutions like Harvard have used DEI initiatives to indoctrinate students in CRT. Do you remember we were told that critical race theory was not in society for the most part? It was something to do with our legal system, and it was something that was never discussed in schools. It really wasn't talked about in society. Critical race theory was supposed to be something confined only to law schools, talking about how laws that were set up decades ago were unfair to people of certain races, but it was really theoretical. It wasn't part of society. And now it's openly part of the DEI push. Since the start of 2023, more than 70 bills targeting DEI in academia have been introduced in more than 24 states, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education. 8 have become law so far. In some cases, state legislatures interested in dismantling these policies get help from scholars hired by organizations like the Claremont Institute, a conservative think tank that believes, quote, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and especially its administrative and jurisprudential offspring, have warped American law and culture and traded one set of racial preferences for another. Ryan P. Williams, president of the Institute, told CNN he believes the ideology behind DEI is fundamentally anti-American. Absolutely correct. Quote, the words that the acronym DEI represents sound nice, but it's nothing more than affirmative action and racial preferences by a different name, a system that features racial headcounts and arbitrarily assigned roles of oppression and oppressed groups in America. Quote, if we continue to do democracy this way, it will only end in acrimony, strife, resentment, and American collapse. The anti-DEI campaign has put colleges and universities under a spotlight. CNN contacted some 24 universities that have been recognized for their commitment to DEI, but only a handful agreed to discuss the issue at all, and just one agreed to a visit. Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville has been recognized for its commitment to diversity 10 years in a row by Insight into Diversity magazine. Dr. Sheila Caldwell, the SIU Systems Vice President for Anti-Racism, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, said the university defines diversity broadly, encompassing not just ethnic background, but also gender, sexual orientation, physical ability, and political, religious, socioeconomic, and geographic differences. Also what they call decentering whiteness. After noticing racial differences among students dropping out of school, Caldwell said SIU Edwardsville introduced an initiative that increased first to second year retention rates for Black students by 10% and for Hispanic students by nearly 4%. And although they were not targeted, retention rates for white students rose too. The school has also seen an increase in enrollment for Black, Hispanic, and Asian students and has improved retention of diverse faculty members, Caldwell said. To be effective, supporters say DEI initiatives must be well-defined and measurable, and there must be genuine buy-in from university leadership. Dan Mahoney, president of the Southern Illinois University System, agreed. Quote, one of the things I think that's really important to point out is a focus on DEI anywhere in society usually helps everybody, Mahoney said. When we do this right, everybody wins. If you would go and ask Mahoney where pushing all of this racist stuff actually benefits all of society, he couldn't actually point anything out because there's no example of everybody winning. Some students CNN interviewed said it was important to learn from and learn to work with people of different backgrounds and views. But with any type of social change, there's always backlash, said Brandy Spann, an SIU Edwardsville junior. So being a junior of this college, she seems to know a lot about the world. I mean, she's a young person, but she can tell you when there's any kind of social change. She would be the one to tell you how society needs to respond. She knows so much. She's so experienced. She goes on to enlighten us with, quote, but I think the direction we're headed in the future, this is necessary. I don't even know if that's a sentence. Once a DEI officer in higher education, Eric Smith now says he thinks increasingly the focus of DEI has shifted to mean racial diversity only. The DEI supporter turned critic. Eric Smith said while he believes some institutions are taking the right approach to DEI, many are not, in part because these days, quote, diversity means diversity of skin color, and that's it. Smith was a DEI officer at Drew University in New Jersey and chaired the diversity committee at Ursinus College outside Philadelphia, but he said he became disillusioned by what he saw as an increasing focus among DEI advocates on things like microaggressions and an us versus them framework. Quote, "It's important to ask for operational definitions. When people say diversity, equity, and inclusion, ask, what do you mean by that?" said Smith, now a research fellow at the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank. Quote, "I want to see a DEI that is undergirded by classical liberal values like individuality, equality, merit, right? Free speech, and forgiveness." Caldwell said the DEI framework at SIU is heavily inspired by the words and ideals in America's founding documents like the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Quote, "American principles are DEI principles," she said. "We seek to fulfill those promises made to groups that have been historically denied." DEI defenders, sounds like a superhero group, DEI defenders argue legislation and intimidation, key tools used to maintain the status quo during the fights for equal rights throughout the 20th century, remain the primary tactics being employed by DEI critics today. These days, harsh rhetoric has mainly replaced threats of physical violence, but Tuitt said the goal is the same, to slow efforts to create a more equitable society. How do you have an equitable society without merit? It doesn't exist. Quote, "The attacks we're seeing on DEI are not new," Tuitt said. "These things happen in cycles." Tuitt likened the present fight to his own experience as a student at Connecticut College in the 1980s, when he joined demonstrations advocating for a greater focus in the curriculum on diverse voices and histories, the societal contributions of a broader range of people, and for diversity training for faculty and staff. Well, "We were conscious about the type of environment that we were experiencing in our institutions," he said. "And then, depending on how well institutions responded to those requests, you started to see pushback with this notion that some communities were losing ground because other communities were being provided with access to resources." Caldwell worries the ongoing criticism of DEI efforts could have a chilling effect that limits discussions around the roles that bigotry and inequitable access to resources play in American society. Well, that's one of the reasons why it's being attacked, because if you remove it from higher ed, you are left with very few spaces in America where that dialogue is consistent and ongoing, she said. This gentleman, Eric Smith, looks like he's done a number of interviews on YouTube. Definitely worth looking up if you want to see more of what he has to say. He has an interesting perspective because he used to support this, and now he's, of course, calling it out because now it's obviously completely absurd and destructive to society to allow these DEI offices to continue. It is a good sign to see the media saying DEI is under attack, DEI is under attack, because that signal says, help, we are losing this fight. So you have to keep pushing, you have to keep fighting, don't listen to nonsense, never be discouraged. Merit will win out, honesty will win out, racism will never win out. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.